Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one having to do with a fascinating entry that occurred sometime in the early 1970s. What makes it so fascinating is because the single eyewitness that was the party to this encounter was someone from law enforcement. There's always an interesting twist, an interesting angle when it happens to involve somebody from an authoritative figure because it tends to add some kind of automatic credence to it. But lo and behold, what happened to this guy actually ended up being a bad thing, and to this day, apparently he regrets the encounter and talking about it afterward. And I'll mention all that info here in a minute. But it has to do with this. It goes by various names as far as the encounter. I'll go ahead and I'll call it what's most commonly known as, and in this case, it's the Falkville Metal Man. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with this encounter. So what was this Falkville Metal Man encounter? Well, again, it occurred in 1973, in this case, on a fateful evening of October 17th, and it was at a location called Falkville, Alabama, hence the name associated with the encounter. And then the single eyewitness that had this encounter was a guy that you're looking at here. He was a 26-year sheriff there, chief of police, in other words, from that location. His name was Jeff Greenhall, and at that time, on that fateful night, he would have this encounter with whatever this creature was, and it pretty much forever changed his life. But yes, indeed, on that evening, he was just resting at home with his wife when all of a sudden, somewhere around 10 p.m. or so, just a little bit after, he received a phone call there to his home. To this day, no one knows who the person was on the other line, but he described it as a woman who was acting nearly hysterical. Whoever this anonymous woman was clearly exasperated as to what she just saw. She stated that she saw a UFO landing just outside of their town in a field that was owned by a gentleman there by the name of Bobby Summerford. And so whoever this woman was immediately knew who this chief of police was and the authoritative figure that he had. Otherwise, she wouldn't have reached out to him, and he of course took down the information. And even though he was actually off that evening, he was someone that apparently worked during the daytime, regular hours in other words, he still had a duty to take these kind of things seriously. And then because of a concern from a citizen, and so off he went up to get his keys, he went up to get his cuffs, and then also his gun. Most importantly though, he actually took a Polaroid camera with him, almost like instinctively, because of what the woman was describing. Again, who this person was, it still remains anonymous to this day. Back then, I imagine there was no caller ID and no way to be able to retrace, like hit some kind of pound 69 number or something else to be able to call back whoever this person was. So the identity of her remains mysterious to this day. But she, if you could call it that, in terms of another eyewitness, would be the second person to have seen this UFO. But still, off he went, trusting his instinct and then also trusting what she said to go over to that land owned by Bobby Summerford. So when he went there, at first he saw nothing. He was in his truck. I don't know if his truck was an actual police truck or if it was his own personal truck, but he had the foresight to be able to call in to the police station and then let them know what he was doing and then what apparently the other person saw. But he patrolled that area, but he found nothing. There was absolutely nothing in sight, at least the first go around. And he decided to take a drive around another part of the field and again continued to see nothing. Finally, this police chief, Mr. Jeff Greenhall, finally went around another part of the property owned by Mr. Summerford, and when he scanned into the far-off darkness, that's when he saw this. Apparently, towards the narrow gravel path on his very final pass, he came face to face with whatever this Falkville Metal Man was. Obviously, this was a huge turning point with his inspection because he was not expecting at all to be able to run into this. Now, as far as the description of this Falkville Metal Man, it's this. It was apparently something that was child size or monkey size, so much smaller, in other words, than your average human person. And there it was, standing about 75 feet away from the police chief's truck. It was encased in some kind of very metallic-like substance, very brilliantly illuminated, in fact, by the high beams coming from the truck. In fact, it made it just stand out even more so. Whatever this silvery metallic-like substance was, he made it sound like it was almost like aluminum foil, but it just completely encased the entire body of this metal man. And it almost seemed to be one single piece, like where the head was, where the neck was, and then where the rest of the body parts were. There was no seams, there was no individual parts. It was all just together one shiny piece of silvery metal. In fact, this is what he said. It looked like his head and neck were kind of made together. He was real bright, something like rubbing mercury on nickel, but just as smooth as glass. Different angles gave different lighting, and when I saw him standing in the middle of the road, I immediately stopped the car and asked if he was a foreigner, but no sound came out of his mouth. And then trying to offer more assistance, Mr. Greenhall actually went up closer to the alien, and he saw too that there was this antenna sticking out the top of its head, and then it began moving in a weird, almost jerky, mechanical fashion. It's almost that unusual, kind of creepy movement when I was reading this and picturing it in my head, where instead of being fluid like you and I would move, walking from one place to another, imagine this thing just moving in a very almost robotic manner. But there it was standing in front of him, and he was getting closer and closer to it. He was asking again if whoever this was needed any assistance. He was acting more along the lines of a police officer, just trying to make sure that this thing, whatever it was not having any kind of harm done to himself or to others, but it wasn't responding. And then finally, something just hit the police chief's head. He realized that all of a sudden what he was looking at was obviously out of the ordinary, and so due to his instinct, he decided to grab that camera that was near his truck. And when he did so, he shot 4 photographs all in quick succession, so that way he could capture exactly what he was seeing. I don't know if he did this to make sure that he could show proof to someone else, or to make sure that he knew what he was seeing and not seeing, something just out of straight of his imagination. But this in turn triggered something within this Falkville Metal Man. Maybe it was the flashes that were occurring just one after the other, but it caused this metal man to suddenly turn and to go about straight into the field in a very, very quick fashion. And the way he described it was almost instantaneous, the way it sprinted across the field at speeds much, much quicker than any human being would do. Now Mr. Greenhall, the police chief, was in pursuit. He saw this thing escape into the woods, and then again, almost acting on instinct, he got into his truck and then he started to chase it. And he did so for about maybe 3 miles or so off the ways of the road. The problem though was this creature, whatever it was very, very fast. In fact, the fastest that Mr. Greenhall could go in his truck due to the conditions of the road was about 35 miles an hour. But this thing was outpacing that. It was outrunning the very speed of the truck, and obviously much faster than any human would. On top of that, Mr. Greenhall stated that this thing almost seemed to defy the laws of gravity the way it worked, because he stated it almost seemed to have these springs on its feet, and when it moved and its heels or its feet touched the ground, each time it did so, it would cover 3 meters, or in other words, almost 9 feet between each sprint. So he was definitely covering a lot of distance much quicker than anyone else would, even on the truck itself. And then things just came to an abrupt end when Mr. Greenhall, I don't know if he saw the ditch or if the ditch just suddenly came up all of a sudden, but still he wasn't able to turn away in time, and the truck slid straight into that ditch, and then it crashed into it. And then he looked, and then he saw this thing, whatever it was, this Falkville Metal Man. It disappeared into the darkness, never to be seen again by him or apparently by others, because again, he remains pretty much the only sole witness associated with this metal man. Now, that other anonymous woman may have seen the UFO, but still, he was the only one that apparently saw this metal man itself. And so he decided to take this encounter and whatever it was, and even though he knew that there was a chance that there was going to be some kind of problems, a lot of skepticisms, a lot of fakeness, a lot of stuff involving him creating a hoax, he still decided to report it to what he saw to others. And unfortunately, based on all the information he gave, even with his 26 years, again, as chief of police within that area, he was met with ridicule. The town council there apparently terminated his job shortly thereafter, and then whatever kind of encounter he had with it, it haunted him so much that it seemed like his marriage actually fell apart soon afterward, too. And then get this, apparently his home later burned down to the ground. So a lot of bad things seem to be going wrong with him after this encounter, all starting, of course, with the loss of his job that he had for a good number of years. To try to add more things too as to what occurred, a lot of people, a lot of skeptics obviously pointed to one simple answer. They stated it was a hoax. They stated that Mr. Greenhall was in on this. He had created this illusion with the help of someone else, maybe someone like a child, a gullible child, in other words, and they put on some kind of regular homemade suit, maybe even made out of the kind of stuff that apparently was used back then to inspect asbestos or to inspect some kind of flames because of the metallic surface surrounding it. And so they thought that he in turn was trying to capitalize on a lot of recent events that occurred involving UFO and these alien man-like creatures that were found. But no, if he definitely didn't do it right, because he never was able to gain any kind of financial incentive from anything afterward. In fact, it seems like all the news as far as the people blaming him and trying to make him the villain of this by trying to perpetrate this quote-unquote hoax, it turned out that it ruined him more than anything. And so that's why he never gained any financial insight, any kind of financial incentive afterward. He did send those pictures, though. He sent them off to the MUFON, to the Mutual UFO Network, and there they were able to come to the conclusion that while it was most likely a fabrication, this is according to them again, as far as to this case and as far as what this guy, Mr. Greenhall, saw, they still though show that the negatives were truly what they were. Like, in other words, they weren't tampered. There was nothing there that showed any kind of false imagery. The negatives were truly what they are. And so whatever he captured, it definitely was real. The conclusion, though, is how real was it? Like, was it truly an alien, in this case a Falkville Metal Man, something from another planet, or was it truly a perpetrated hoax to try to see if there's something else gained from this type of bad activity? But who knows? Again, this is the only type of encounter that occurred in that area, and to this day, it seems like this former chief, Mr. Greenhall, has decided to remain quiet. I don't know if he's still alive, considering this is 1973. If someone can point that out too, if he's still living in that area and just living a quiet life, or he passed away later on. Still, though, he was able to have his story published within a lot of other places because of the notoriety surrounding it. But if anyone has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. What do you guys think about that? Does it add more theory to the fact that a lot of people that do see these encounters, that they don't want to report these things because of the fear, the notoriety that comes with it, the idea that people automatically just state that, hey, you're just making this stuff up, and so let's go ahead and let's ruin your life because of it? I think it does, because it does make people scared to be able to come forward with that kind of stuff, and here's a clear example of it. But if anyone has any more info related to this case, please let us know. All right, everyone, nice skin as always. Take care.